The auction rooms at Drawn's smelled like old money, a mix of cedar, cool air, and absolute stillness. It was a beautiful room, impeccable. The ceilings were high. The lighting made everything look far more significant than it actually was. The front rows belonged to the elite, names recognized on sight. The middle rows filled next. The back rows were for the spectators, the people who came just to watch. Fabian J. Starks sat in the middle section, seat 7F. He had occupied this exact seat for 5 visits over 8 months. He always arrived early. He always left last. He never introduced himself. He never stopped at the front desk. He just sat with his catalog open, his paddle across his knee, watching, learning, preparing. Fabian understood rooms like this. He knew their silent vocabulary, the nod from the podium, the accepted bid, the 1,000 small signals that told you exactly who belonged and who didn't. He was an expert at reading those signals, and he didn't like what he saw. In exactly 4 minutes, the auctioneer would call lot 42. In exactly 4 minutes, Fabian would raise his paddle for the very first time, and David R. Drawn, the man running the floor with the unearned confidence of someone who had never been questioned, was going to look directly at that raised paddle and look away. He would do it once, he would do it twice, and then a third time. Then, David would lean into his microphone and make a joke in front of a room full of witnesses, a joke recorded live by a journalist who had already noticed the tension building. David had no idea who was sitting in seat 7F. He never bothered to find out. He was fast at making assumptions and completely incapable of admitting he was wrong. Lot 42 was 30 seconds away. Welcome back to Accountability TV, where arrogance always meets reality. If you love stories of quiet masterminds taking down corrupt elites, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss a single reckoning. 19 minutes. That is exactly how long the paddle stayed down. Fabian J. Starks didn't storm out. He didn't make a scene. He didn't demand to see a manager. A lesser man would have lost his temper. But Fabian? He simply sat in seat 7F, quiet, calm, lethal. He placed his auction paddle flat on the armrest, picked up his phone, and read a text message he had been ignoring for an hour. It was from his attorney, Jerry Davenport. 4 simple words. Board confirmed. We're clear. Fabian typed a 2-word reply. He put the phone away. He picked up his paddle, and he waited. He had been waiting for 11 months. It didn't start with a headline. It started on the 14th floor of Drawn's auction house, a building thousands of people walk past every day without looking up. But Fabian looked up. For 2 years he studied them. He analyzed their books, their history, their aging infrastructure, and, most importantly, their utter mismanagement. The founder, Arthur Drawn, spent 40 years building trust. His son, David, spent just 4 years destroying it. For 11 grueling months, attorneys traded non-disclosure agreements and corporate terms. The board knew exactly who Fabian was. They knew his $47 million buyout offer was generous. They knew Fabian had the power to walk away and the absolute intention to stay. But the board forgot one critical detail. They never told David. David R. Drawn ran the floor by pure ego. He looked at Fabian on his first visit and made a snap judgment in 4 seconds. Quiet man. No entourage. Nobody important. The kind of person you ignore. So, David ignored him. For 5 straight months. But people were watching. The front desk manager noticed the pattern and flagged it twice. Her warnings went into the trash. An art journalist noticed it too. By the 3rd visit, she had notes. By the 5th visit, a folder. By tonight, she had a secret recording. Fabian hadn't come tonight to make a point. He came to finalize the paperwork on a building. His team had forced him to attend. He did not come to be skipped over. He did not come to be mocked into a live microphone in front of a room full of billionaires. But David Drawn just made the biggest mistake of his life. David is still on the floor, still holding his father's gavel like a birthright. He thinks he's in control. He has no idea he just sold his company to the man in seat 7F. Fabian raises his paddle. Lot 61 is about to open, and accountability? It's about to be delivered. Fabian J. Starks had not always operated from a 14-story corporate tower. Not long ago, his headquarters was a cheap folding table. It sat in the back room of his grandmother's house on Crestline Avenue, a neighborhood that real estate brochures politely described as transitional. The table had one leg shorter than the others. Fabian fixed it with a piece of folded cardboard and never thought about it again. He had more important things to focus on. He understood a fundamental truth. Attention is the only resource that can never be replaced. When he was 24, his grandmother, Rosalie Starks, handed him the deed to that building. It wasn't a gift, it was a test. She looked at him across her kitchen table and said, "Do something with it that I would recognize." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. She meant, do something that matters to the people on this street. Do something that doesn't force them to leave. Fabian did exactly that. Then he did it again and again. One forgotten building at a time. One written-off neighborhood at a time. His methodology was so quiet and deliberate that by the time the financial press noticed, Fabian was already 3 moves ahead of the narrative. He didn't care about headlines. He cared about execution. Today, Starks Capital manages $2.1 billion in private assets. The firm employs 41 people. 33 of them were promoted from within. His team is tight, bulletproof, loyal. There is Darlene, his operations director. She has been there since the 3rd property. She speaks only in direct, declarative sentences that leave zero room for misinterpretation. There is Alicia, his assistant, a woman who anticipates exactly what Fabian needs before he even knows he needs it. And then there is Jerry Davenport, the sharpest legal mind in the city. Jerry speaks slowly in public, but inside a negotiation room, he becomes a predator. He knows exactly where to find a deal's pressure point and exactly when to apply the weight. Fabian trusts them completely. He trusts very few people. In his world, trust is not given. It is earned through accumulated demonstration. To the elite, Fabian is unreadable, not because he is cold. The people on Crestline Avenue know he isn't cold. He still drives by his grandmother's old building every single week. He remembers names. He remembers details. He is still because he has to be. In rooms full of sharks, being readable is a death sentence. His stillness is a practice. It is what happens when a man carries the full weight of the stakes and refuses to let it show on his face. For 8 months, Fabian attended Drown's auction house. 5 visits, same section, same measured attention. No introductions, no networking. He was analyzing the room, the rhythm, the culture. He studied it the way he studies anything he plans to acquire. He walked into that building like a man who already owned it, simply deciding what to do with the furniture. The multi-million-dollar artwork on tonight's sheet? It was secondary. The auction house itself was the real target. Tomorrow morning, Fabian was scheduled to sign the final papers to buy the entire company. 11 months of grueling legal warfare were finally over. Tonight was supposed to be a mere formality, a victory lap. He did not expect the public insult. He did not expect the auctioneer to mock him into a live microphone. But Fabian is still in seat 7F. His paddle is resting on the armrest. The arrogance of David Drown is about to collide with reality, because Lot 61 is finally opening. David R. Drown arrived at the auction floor the way he arrived every evening, 20 minutes late. Moving fast enough to suggest purpose, but never quite achieving it. His jacket settled on his shoulders with the practiced ease of a man who spent his entire life in rooms that rearranged themselves around his entrance. He was a good-looking man, his face photographed well for catalog headshots, press materials, and annual gala programs. He had his father's broad build, but he did not have his father's eyes. Arthur Drown had the eyes of a man who genuinely listened. David had the eyes of a man who was just waiting for you to finish talking. He moved through the crowd with an ambient authority. People stepped aside, not because they feared him, but because David's body language communicated a dangerous truth. He was not going to change course. You either cleared the path or you caused a collision. David stopped at the registration desk. He exchanged a brief word with a new hire whose name he hadn't bothered to learn. He didn't need to. In his mind, employees came and went. Only the floor mattered. Then he scanned the room. This was the habit his staff had learned to anticipate. A slow, systematic sweep from left to right, front row to back. He was taking inventory, not of the art, but of the people. He was sorting them, assigning them value. Within 30 seconds, David built a mental map of who in this room mattered and who did not. He decided who deserved a respectful nod and who belonged in the cheap folding chairs by the side wall. It was no longer a conscious thought. It was a reflex. His father had once told him that an auctioneer's first job is to read the room. Arthur meant, understand the energy, feel the appetite, and know where the money wants to go. But David heard something else entirely. David heard, decide who is worth your attention before the hammer falls. He had been deciding ever since. His gavel was on the podium. His water glass was exactly where he liked it. The catalog was open. He had 6 minor lots before the massive Basquiat painting. He could already feel the tension building. The room was hungry for it. But David did not look at seat 7F. He had looked at seat 7F on the very first night Fabian J. Starks appeared. He made his snap judgment then, and he never looked back. David's mind was not the kind of mind that revisited decisions. He prided himself on quick, accurate reads. In 4 years of running this floor, he had never been given a single reason to doubt his arrogance. He picked up his gavel. He tapped it once, lightly, against the wood. The room instantly settled. Conversations dropped. The attendants along the wall straightened up. A heavy hush descended over the floor like a held breath. David R. Drawn looked out over the wealthy crowd, but he didn't actually see what was in front of him. He only saw what he had already decided was there. The mental map he drew months ago was the map he was still using tonight. A map based entirely on elitism and assumption. And it was about to be completely, catastrophically wrong. "Good evening," he said into the microphone. The room answered with an expectant silence. David opened the first lot. He had no idea his empire was already gone. Lot 42 was a 1982 Basquiat, acrylic and oil stick on canvas. The estimate in the catalog read $900,000 to $1.2 million. The reserve was set at $850,000. Fabian J. Starks had read that catalog entry 11 times. He had studied the artwork in person at the preview 2 days earlier. He stood in front of it for a long time without speaking, took no photographs, and left without registering his interest. That was deliberate. Fabian never broadcasted his intentions before he was ready to act. When he was ready, he struck. Not a second before. He was ready tonight. David R. Drawn opened the lot at $800,000. Fabian raised his paddle. It was a clean raise, not tentative, not flashy. Paddle straight up, elbows slightly bent. It was the body language of a seasoned professional. He did it without theater or announcement. It was a simple statement of fact. I am here. I am bidding. Acknowledge me. David's eyes swept the room. They passed right over seat 7F. $850. Do I have $850? David looked toward the back left section, where a regular in a gray suit gave a small nod. $850. Thank you. In seat 7F, Fabian kept his paddle up for 2 more seconds, then lowered it. His face remained an unreadable mask. He looked back at his catalog. At $900,000, Fabian raised his paddle again. David's eyes completed their sweep and settled briefly on a woman in the 3rd row. She wasn't even bidding. Yet David's gaze stayed on her anyway, long enough to be noticeable, before drifting upward. $900 to the gentleman in the back. Thank you. There was no gentleman in the back who had bid. David was completely inventing bids to bypass Fabian. A woman in the press row leaned toward her companion. A silent look passed between them. They had just witnessed a blatant public insult, and neither wanted to name it out loud. Fabian lowered his paddle. He looked at the Basquiat on the display stand. He stared at it with zero expression. He turned the page of his program, not because he had lost interest, but because he was processing. Fabian was a man who calculated everything internally before making his move. He refused to give David a single reaction to weaponize. At $1 million, Fabian raised his paddle a third time. The entire room was watching now. The atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, like the pressure change before a massive storm. The gallery acquisition agents sat up. The front desk manager stood by the wall, arms crossed, staring intently at David. David leaned toward his microphone. He did it slowly and comfortably, with the smug confidence of a man who believed he owned the room. His voice came out smooth and arrogant. "I don't think we're quite ready for that one yet." A quiet, awkward laugh rippled through the crowd, then died instantly. David had just publicly humiliated a billionaire. The lot closed at $1,120,000, bought by a phone bidder David acknowledged in the final seconds. The hammer fell. The sale was registered. Fabian J. Starks set his paddle flat on the armrest. He did not look at David. He did not adjust his posture. He sat perfectly still. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. There was a message from his attorney, Jerry Davenport. 4 simple words. "Board confirmed. We're clear." Fabian read it twice. He typed a 2-word response. He put the phone away, picked his paddle back up, and rested it across his knee. Lot 43 opened. Fabian did not bid. He wasn't interested in art anymore. He was thinking about Lot 61, the final lot of the evening. It wasn't a painting. It was the building itself. David R. Drawn did not go home after the auction. Instead, he went to his usual high-end restaurant 4 blocks away. The owner knew his name, and his favorite corner table was always held without him asking. He dined with Marcus Fell, his floor manager, and Giles, his veteran catalog director. Giles had survived the transition from father to son by mastering the art of being invisible. The Basquiat had sold well. The overall numbers were strong. David was in high spirits. He operated best when everything went exactly as he expected. He didn't give Seat 7F a single thought. He hadn't thought about the man since the hammer fell. To David, the public insult was barely even a joke. It was just a tone, a casual lean, the kind of thing you say to keep a wealthy room moving. He had used versions of that line 100 times before. No one had ever complained. He viewed it as part of running a floor, but at 9:14 p.m., everything changed. Art journalist Lillian Marquez uploaded 40 seconds of raw footage to social media. Her caption was only 14 words. Auctioneer at Drawn skips the same black bidder 3 times, then explains why. She didn't editorialize. She didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. By 9:40, the post had been shared 4,000 times. By 10:15, it reached 31,000 shares. By midnight, it hit over 200,000 shares. It was picked up by national news platforms and a massive media account with 4 million followers. They added just 3 words to the caption: "Watch his face." David's assistant, Patrick, spotted the viral post at 9:51 p.m. He watched the footage and sat frozen at his desk for 45 seconds. Then, he forwarded it to David's phone with a terrifying note. "You need to see this." But David's phone was lying face down on the restaurant table. He didn't look at it until 10:38, when he walked to the restroom. In just those 2 minutes, his screen exploded with 17 urgent notifications and a missed call from Giles, who was literally sitting 6 feet away from him. David watched the viral video inside a bathroom stall. He watched it twice. The first time, he didn't feel alarmed. He thought it was just an out-of-context clip. In 48 hours, the internet would move on to something else. But the second time he watched it, he noticed the details. He saw Lillian's phone recording. He saw the gallery directors staring. He saw his own front desk manager watching from the wall. And he heard that awkward laugh captured with absolute, brutal clarity by the microphone. Most of all, he noticed the man in seat 7F. The clip only showed his profile and his broad shoulders. He hadn't moved. He hadn't reacted. He didn't flinch. He had simply set his paddle down, pulled out his phone, and become perfectly still. From this angle, that stillness didn't look like defeat. It looked like a death sentence. David walked back to the table. He picked up his wine glass, then set it down without drinking. "Everything all right?" his floor manager asked. "Fine," David lied. Giles looked at him across the table. Giles had been invisible long enough to recognize the exact moment an empire begins to crumble. He said nothing. He just looked at the wall. David's phone vibrated twice against the table. This time, he was too afraid to turn it over. Lillian Marquez did not go home after the auction either. By 9 p.m., she was at her desk, typing furiously. The footage was uploaded, the caption was written, and the decision to publish was made instantly. Lillian had been documenting this story for 3 months. She had more than enough evidence to destroy an empire. The secret folder on her desktop was labeled Drawns Pattern. It had been open for 11 weeks. It contained time-stamped notes, industry insider leaks, and 3 photographs from a March auction. Those photos captured the precise geography of David Drawn's arrogance. They proved exactly where his eyes went, and where they refused to look. It was a consistent, documented choice. Tonight, she added 40 seconds of damning video. Lillian had started recording during the very first skip. As a veteran journalist, she knew a train wreck when she saw one. The recording was flawless. She held her phone steady from the press row, capturing a perfect line of sight to the podium and to seat 7F simultaneously. The audio was crystal clear. The microphone captured David's smug voice, the awkward laugh from the crowd, and the heavy, suffocating silence that followed. She reviewed the raw footage 3 times before hitting publish. She didn't edit it, trim it, or add text overlays. She didn't need to. The 40 seconds were lethal on their own. They began with David's eyes deliberately passing Fabian's raised paddle and ended with his gavel falling on a fake bid. By 10:30 p.m., her phone rang. It was Thelma Womack. Thelma had managed the registration desk at Drawns for 9 years. She was professional, precise, and invisible. She was not the type of person to call journalists, but Thelma had flagged this exact behavior internally twice. Both times, her warnings were thrown into a desk drawer. She had watched Lillian's clip 4 times, and she had finally had enough. The call lasted 22 minutes. Thelma's account was clinical and organized. She described Fabian's very first visit, exactly what she told her supervisor, and the dismissive response she received. She exposed the toxic hierarchy of David Drawn's operation, who got called by name, who got acknowledged, and who had their bids straight up stolen and relocated to other parts of the room. Thelma blew the whistle wide open. She gave Lillian names, dates, and lot numbers for 6 other incidents spanning 7 months. Lillian wrote down every single word. At 11:15 p.m., gallery director Candace Stowe sent a text message. It was short and sharp. "I have notes from 3 previous visits, and I know 2 other people who do. Tell me what you need." Lillian told her. By midnight, the file on Lillian's desktop had a new name. It was no longer labeled Pattern. It was now labeled Drawns Record. The viral clip now had 200,000 shares. The record now contained 6 documented cases, 3 elite industry witnesses, and 2 buried corporate complaints. Combined with 40 seconds of raw video, the evidence was absolute. Across the city, David Drawn's phone lay face down on a restaurant tablecloth. It vibrated 11 more times in the dark. The trap was fully set. The board of Drawn's auction house consisted of 7 members. By 8 o'clock the next morning, 4 of them had already called Warren Fitch. Warren Fitch was the board chair. He was 61 years old, clinical, and possessed the unshakable calm of a man who had managed 100 corporate crises. Warren had been awake since dawn. He had watched the viral clip 7 times, and at 6:30 a.m., he pulled the non-disclosure file on Stark's Capital. He sat with the documents for a long time. Then, at 9 and 2 a.m., he called David Drawn. David answered on the 3rd ring. His voice sounded exhausted, straining to mask his panic. He tried to say good morning. Warren ignored the greeting entirely. "Have you looked at who that man is?" Warren said. It wasn't a question. David admitted he hadn't. Warren let a heavy, suffocating silence hang over the phone line. He wanted David to feel the sudden weight of his own stupidity. "His name is Fabian J. Starks," Warren said flatly. "He is the principal of Stark's Capital. They manage $2.1 billion in private assets. He has been under a non-disclosure agreement with this board for 11 months, David. We are in final terms on the acquisition of this house." The line went dead silent. "The closing meeting is this morning," Warren continued with lethal precision. "He came last night to look at the Basquiat and to confirm the buyout in person. That is why he was in that room. That is why he has been attending for 5 months." David couldn't speak. "He is the only reason," Warren said, "that this board is able to close a deal to save this house from bankruptcy. A financial disaster that I have been carrying for 18 months and that you have been too blind to see." The silence stretched. "He owns us, David, or very nearly. And last night, you leaned into a microphone and told 400 elite guests that you didn't think he was ready." David made a choked, wordless sound. "I need you to come in," Warren ordered. "Not to the floor, to the 14th floor conference room, 9:30. Do not speak to anyone. Do not post anything online. Come in and sit down." Warren ended the call. In his luxury apartment, David Drawn sat on the edge of his bed, paralyzed. His phone screen went dark, reflecting his own pale face. Months ago, he had categorized Fabian Starks in under 4 seconds as a nobody. His arrogance had blinded him. His judgment was catastrophically wrong. Meanwhile, across the city, the trap was closing. In the 14th floor conference room, attorney Jerry Davenport was already seated. His briefcase was open, and the buyout documents were arranged in flawless order. The board's attorney sat across from him. The coffee was poured. Fabian J. Starks walked in at exactly 9:15 a.m. He wore a dark suit and carried nothing but his phone. He sat down and looked at the paperwork. He did not mention the previous evening. He didn't reference the public insult, the fake bids, or the viral video that had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. Fabian looked at his legal team, looked at the contract, and said 2 words: "Begin reading." The formal complaint arrived at Drawn's corporate office at exactly 9:15 a.m. It was delivered by a private courier. Fabian's attorney, Jerry Davenport, insisted on a physical delivery. He knew that how a warning arrives communicates just as much as what it contains. The document was 41 pages long. The cover letter was incredibly short, just 2 paragraphs. It was cold, formal, and precise. It named the date, the venue, the lot numbers, and the exact nature of the offense. It did not editorialize. It did not use dramatic language. It simply stated the facts, cited the evidence, and demanded immediate legal remedies. Jerry wrote it like a concrete wall, unshakable and tightly packed. But the 41 pages that followed were completely devastating. The file contained Lillian Marquez's viral footage, time-stamped and certified. It held her meticulous notes from 3 previous visits, proving the exact geometry of David Drawn's bias. It included the sworn, signed affidavit of the front desk manager, Thelma Womack, exposing 9 years of corruption and 6 specific incidents of stolen bids. It contained testimonies from gallery directors and copies of the internal complaints that management had buried in a drawer. To round it all out, the file included 9 pages of brutal legal analysis, citing 4 unstoppable precedents. Board Chair Warren Fitch read every single page in complete silence. He locked his office door and ignored all incoming calls. As a seasoned executive, he knew the difference between a crisis you can contain and a crisis that has already destroyed you. This was the second kind. By 10 o'clock, terrified board members were spamming Warren's phone. One member sent a text containing a single question mark. Warren called him back. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. "The buyout has to close," the board member panicked. "I know," Warren replied. "With his new condition?" "I know," Warren said grimly. The new condition belonged to Fabian. It wasn't part of the original agreement. It had been added at 9:47 that morning, typed directly into the contract by Jerry Davenport while the board's attorney watched in horror. The amendment was lethal. The $47 million buyout would proceed, but the entire leadership of floor operations was subject to immediate review. Any individual found guilty of discriminatory conduct would be instantly fired as a condition of the sale. The board's attorney read the sentence twice. He looked at Fabian, whose face remained a perfect, unreadable mask. "I'll need to take this to the board," the attorney stammered. "Of course," Fabian replied calmly. By 11:15, the board surrendered and signed the contract. At noon, an urgent internal email was blasted to the entire company. It stated that David R. Drawn had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a formal review. The corporate email used safe words like procedural and standard protocol, trying desperately to sound calm while the empire was burning down. But David was already gone. He had arrived at his 9:30 disciplinary meeting as ordered. Warren Fitch and 2 stone-faced board members were waiting for him. Warren spoke for 6 minutes. Without anger or theater, he laid out the overwhelming evidence, the board's total surrender, and David's immediate termination. David tried to ask 3 desperate questions. The first 2 were coldly answered. The third was completely ignored. At 10:10 a.m., David Drawn was escorted out of his own family building by security. His expensive auction gavel was left behind on the clerk's table, and nobody picked it up. The acquisition of Drawn's auction house by Starks Capital officially closed at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. The moment the board's attorney signed the final page and slid the documents across the table, Fabian J. Starks became the sole owner of the historic institution. The final purchase price was $47.3 million. It was $2.1 million below the board's original asking price. Fabian's attorney, Jerry Davenport, had ruthlessly negotiated that discount by exposing the house's tanking market value. The board had accepted the massive price cut without a single counteroffer. They had no leverage left. They just desperately needed the deal to close before total bankruptcy hit. Fabian signed last. He used the exact same plain pen his grandmother had given him decades ago when he signed his very first building deed on Crestline Avenue. He signed each page with absolute calm, never pausing, never looking up. When the last page was finished, he set the pen down, gave Jerry a slight nod, and stood up. The multi-million-dollar buyout was complete. But the real destruction of David Drawn was happening on a parallel track. In public legal filings released the following month, David was hit with a brutal $1.87 million judgment in damages. The odd number was calculated with clinical precision. It accounted for the 6 documented incidents of bias, the 2 suppressed internal complaints, and the financial loss of the Basquiat painting closing $80,000 below its true value because David refused to take Fabian's bids. Jerry also tacked on a severe penalty multiplier because the discrimination had been a systematic policy in everything but name. David signed the ruinous financial settlement in complete silence. But Fabian didn't just take David's money and his company. He permanently dismantled his legacy. The legal filing forced 3 massive structural changes onto the auction house. First, a strict new anti-discrimination policy with aggressive enforcement clauses. Second, an independent civil rights review of every single auction record from the past 4 years. And third, a mandatory rule that any employee complaint regarding floor conduct must be sent directly to an external, third-party investigator, completely bypassing internal management. This final, lethal condition had been suggested by the front desk manager, Thelma Womack. Jerry Davenport had written it into the contract word for word. David Drawn's firing was executed that same week. The legal terms banned him from holding any management, floor operations, or cataloging position at any licensed auction venue in the state for the next 5 years. His career was completely dead. He issued no public statement. Meanwhile, the viral video uploaded by journalist Lillian Marquez exploded to over 4 million views. Her investigative story ran in 3 explosive parts. The final piece featured Thelma Womack's full, unedited testimony, published under her real name at her own request. After 9 years of being invisible, Thelma refused to hide any longer. Today, Thelma is still on the staff at Drawn's auction house under the new ownership. But she is no longer sitting at the front registration desk. She now runs the entire building's operations. The first auction under new management at Drawn's took place on the second Thursday of the following spring. It was a cold, pale April evening. Fabian J. Starks was not in attendance. He had already made the critical structural decisions. He appointed a new floor director, overhauled the catalog process, and fixed the corrupt bidding system. His operations manager, Darlene, executed the changes with ruthless efficiency. Once Fabian finished calculating a problem, he delegated it completely. The auction house was now in the hands of people who knew exactly what they were there to do. He didn't need to witness the proof of his victory. Instead, Fabian was on Crestline Avenue. It was a Thursday. This street had been his priority since the early days when a broken folding table was his entire corporate office, and this neighborhood was his entire world. The building his grandmother had given him was still there. He had never sold it. He renovated it twice, converting the ground floor into a small community art space and the upper floors into affordable apartments for locals. He deliberately kept the rent low, refusing to exploit the neighborhood when the city's housing market exploded. He parked 2 houses down and walked unhurriedly, hands in his pockets. He observed everything with a quiet, intense focus. After the corporate buyout went public, his assistant, Alicia, asked if he wanted to issue a press release. Fabian said no. Media platforms begged him for interviews after discovering the true identity of the mysterious man in seat 7F. He denied them all. He gave only one comment directly to journalist Lillian Marquez for the grand finale of her exposé. It was just 2 sentences. He had weighed the words carefully, refusing to say more than was necessary. He told her, "The house is a good house. It will be better when it runs the way it should." Lillian printed the quote exactly as it was. It didn't need any further explanation. On Crestline Avenue, the warm, yellow light from the community art space spilled onto the dark pavement. Through the window, Fabian could see a handful of neighborhood residents gathered inside. The door was always open. Art didn't require a justification here, and neither did presence. He did not walk inside. He stood on the sidewalk, staring at the building his grandmother had handed him across a plastic tablecloth decades ago, demanding he do something she would recognize. Then he thought about the Basquiat painting. He had actually bought it 3 weeks after taking over the company. He acquired it privately through a trusted dealer at fair market value, completely avoiding the inflated drama of a public auction. Fabian never needed a crowded room to validate his choices. He knew what the artwork was worth long before the catalog was ever printed. The multi-million-dollar masterpiece was now hanging on the wall behind his executive desk. It wasn't centered or spotlighted. It was just placed where it fit, catching the morning light perfectly. The empire was running smoothly. Darlene was handling corporate calls. Alicia was locking down a new real estate deal on the East Side. And his attorney, Jerry Davenport, had officially filed the final compliance papers from the David Drawn settlement. Fabian had simply reviewed the notes, made his executive decisions, and moved forward. It was the exact same routine he had practiced since the days of the broken folding table. Standing on the dark pavement of Crestline Avenue in the pale spring air, Fabian looked at the glowing windows of the art space one last time. He smiled to himself. He knew his grandmother would have recognized exactly what he had built. Fabian turned and walked back to his car. He had an early meeting tomorrow morning, and there was still work to be done.